Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time to come to the Lynbrook High School cafeteria. And I want to especially thank the principal here, Maria Jackson, for opening up her home and the entire staff for being so helpful. For those of you who are listening on Zoom, welcome. And if you're just looking at the videotape, what you saw were the smiling faces of teenagers from East to West Coast who've recently died from fentanyl poisoning. This video was produced by the mother of a teenage son who died from fentanyl as a way for her to channel her grief and to show other parents the young faces of other victims. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Cindy Chavez. I'm a member of the Board of Supervisors. And tonight is an opportunity for us to learn more about fentanyl and the fake counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl coming into our community and killing teens who think they're using it recreationally or they're taking something else, a Percocet, an ecstasy, a Xanax, methamphetamines, or cocaine. We have an incredible panel for you tonight. And we're going to have each of our panelists speak, and then we want to stop. We want to make sure we can answer questions or get feedback. Our goal is to make sure that we have the most effective tools that we can get to stop the deaths in our community. And some of this is going to be how well is the education that we're giving, how good is the information, and frankly, how helpful is it? What you saw when you came in was a QR code that I hope we're able to post as well. So if you're on watching this live, you'll be able to access it too, because what we want is your feedback. That's very important. With that, I know that I know this is a very painful topic and a very personal topic for some. And I want to start by saying that of our panelists, we're going to start with Brennan Mullen, the father of Aiden Mullen, a senior at Los Gatos High School who died of fentanyl poisoning. We're then going to speak to or hear from Myra Parwiz, who's the director of addiction medicine and therapy services for Santa Clara County. Dr. Ali Al-Qurashi, who just said I could call him Dr. Ali, which I really appreciate, who's an adolescent psychiatrist and the chief of substance use services. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen, Dr. Rachel Sussman, a county opioid specialist. What you will learn is what fentanyl is, what a fake fentanyl pill does, where it's sold, how self-medicating and mental health are intertwined, treatments, and how law enforcement is dealing with the crisis here. I'm going to ask that when each presenter is done, we're going to let them all go through the panel, but we're going to open it up as quickly as we can for questions. I'm going to remind our panelists that you each have a set amount of time and encourage you to stay within that time so that we can get to questions. If you're on Zoom, you can type your questions into the chat and they will be asked on your behalf. One thing I wanted to ask is if we could just make sure we have a time for folks here so that they know what time it is. Beth, if you could do that. We're going to begin our presentations with a video by Liz and Rob Walker, who live right up the road in San Carlos. And this was a message they developed for other parents.
After we had gone to sleep and said goodnight to him, he made the worst decision he could have ever made. From just doing a little bit of what he had been sold, 5 times the amount of fentanyl that would have killed him was in his body. And Colin didn't ask for fentanyl. Colin didn't want to die.
We're Rob and Liz Walker. We have lived in San Carlos for 17 years. We raised our family here. Grew up through all the schools here. They went to Heather and Terra Linda, and then Colin was at Cramont.
Colin loved sports. From an early age, he always grabbed a baseball mitt, picked up a basketball, shot baskets, played soccer, and really excelled at just being outside playing.
He worked hard in school. Probably the most just important thing to him is he loved being funny, and he was really funny.
Welcome back to CBS News. Today, we have been facing a tragedy.
Colin loved to push himself. He would jump off the highest rock at the lake. He never wanted to settle. He always pushed himself. COVID was a big change for him. When the lockdown started, he began to spend a lot more time in his room with his door closed.
There was just something off, really off, those last 2 weeks of his life. And so that morning, got up, took him down there. It's 10 a.m. He didn't wake up before 1 p.m. most of the time on weekends, but I took him to see the doctor who we trusted. She said, he's not suicidal. And we both know that he wasn't suicidal. He felt very depressed.
It was 12 o'clock and I knew he had an appointment at 12:30 and I was about to go to my daughter's soccer game. And so I went into his room and I opened the door and he wasn't in bed. And so I went over to his brother's room next door and I said, "Do you know where Colin is?" And he said, "Dad, Colin's here." And I said, "No, Colin's not in bed." And he said, "Well, call him." So I picked my phone up and I called Colin. And I heard the phone ring in his room. And so I walked in his room and he wasn't in bed, but he had fallen out of his chair at some point that night after doing the cocaine that had a lethal amount of fentanyl, and he died. I knew as soon as I saw him that there was no trying to get him back. It had been a long time that he had been laying there. And I just started screaming.
I watched my son's body be taken out our front door in a body bag. And I knew I had brought him in that door as a baby. And I spoke, "Go out." And no family should ever have to go through that, which is why we are doing what we're doing. We can't bring our son back. We'll never know what his life was going to be. But if one kid hears this and says it is not worth it, hopefully we'll never know if this was successful or not, because we won't hear about another kid dying.
He bought a drug that was poisoned. He didn't die because he had an overdose. It's not an overdose when you weren't knowingly taking a drug that you were sold. He was poisoned. And in the end, our son was killed.
This isn't about don't do drugs, just say no. This is decades, for years, for hundreds of years, teenagers have experimented. They've been impulsive, they've taken risks. Drugs have been part of that. But now, you experiment and you can die. I hope parents talk to their kids, but I hope really that the kids that are hearing this and teenagers at the high school go, no pain is so great that a drug that you're just trying to dull that pain is worth taking. Or if you don't have mental health issues, no high or fun at a party is fun enough to die.
Thank you. I'm going to invite up Brennan Mullen.
Thank you very much. It's hard watching that video as a parent. You're going to hear another story, same outcome, different reason for it, same poisoning, different drug, different format of drug. I'm Brennan Mullen, and I live in nearby Los Gatos, and we lost our son Aiden. He's a brother to my daughter and my wife, Kristen, obviously our son. He died November 25th, 2020, right before Thanksgiving. He had recently turned 18 years old and had just graduated and on his way to college after deferring during COVID for a semester. He died of fentanyl poisoning after taking a counterfeit Percocet pill. And while in Aiden's case it was a fentanyl, for others it's party drugs. It's prevalent everywhere. It is not simply in pills. You just heard another tragedy around it, cocaine cut with fentanyl. Like these parents, our grief has been a constant for us. It's a constant passenger for us. It will be for life. And how we've chosen to channel it is to try to educate parents, educators, most importantly, young people who have the most influence on each other in order to combat this. And it has felt right to put our energy there. And you'll hear a lot today, you'll learn a lot today, I hope, both on the prevention on the supply side and then on the demand side. And the efforts where we've been putting a lot of our energy is on that demand side in order to reduce the interest in it and ultimately through word of mouth, through young people, prevent it on a more natural versus preachy way. About Aiden, you can see in some of the videos here, but he was a fun-loving kid and teenager who loved guitar and being outdoors and very loyal to his friends. He experimented with drugs, mainly marijuana, and we as parents were hypervigilant, as I'm sure many of the parents here are. A year and a half ago, we knew very little about fentanyl. It seemed like some drug that was causing overdoses in far-off places, and I can tell you it doesn't discriminate. Doesn't matter how great a parent you were. It finds its way into every community, as it did into ours and into many of these high schools. I can tell you that it's prevalent, as I mentioned, Xanax, Adderall, Oxy, Percocet. Most of what you're going to buy on the street is, or you'll hear today in the stats, but a lot of it counterfeit. And more often than not, the victims are unaware. I want to believe Aiden was unaware. Like the last case, he certainly didn't want to die. And how these drugs are sourced are often through social media. And there is its own language, which is always evolving, from emojis to code words on symbols for what each drug is called, and it's always changing and it's always being fought. And as parents, you're going to learn a little bit today, and there's plenty of resources out there for you to learn how to read the signs. So I won't dwell on that, but I can tell you that had we known now what the information that's available now, I think it could have made a difference. We're thankfully able to reach this young demographic through the same power of the same platforms on social media today. And I know it can, just by the numbers, reduce demand by educating. I know how many we can reach in the 18 or even 12 to 24 critical demographic, and we've done so through various coalitions of the big tech companies here in the Valley. And there are plenty of resources for you, not only today, that what you're going to learn, but others as well, from grieving parents, plus resources that have been very organic and homegrown content to try to help you and to try to educate you. Songforcharlie.org is one such organization from another family who lost their son Charlie and have put their energy behind educating, and you will find a wealth of information there. I encourage you today to listen, ask the questions. There is no bad question when it comes to this, and I hope that through us parents here today, plus your dedicated the County of Santa Clara overall in fighting this, and I urge you to be part of this fight with us, young or old. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brennan, and I think the most important person you'll hear from tonight, you just heard from, and for all of you who've lost someone, our hearts really suffer with yours, but not to the same degree, so we really appreciate you being with us. I now get to introduce Myra Parwiz, who's the Director of Addiction Medicine and Therapy Services, and Dr. Ali, our Adolescent Psychiatric Chief of Substance Use Services, and they're going to come together, I think. Is that right?
We'll do one at a time.
Okay. I think our interpreter appreciates that. Good. One at a time.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez, for hosting this event, putting it together, for introductions, and welcome all parents, students, faculty. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here with you to shed some light on this very important topic that affects each one of you here as a parent, as a student, as a faculty. So tonight, since we have very limited time, so I'm going to basically focus on what fentanyl is general, give you some general information, and give you some resources that what's available in the county, and talk about a little bit of treatment. I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Al-Quraishi, who's our adolescent psychiatrist and works closely on this subject with us in terms of treatment. So you will talk more about mental health and substance use affecting our teens today. So with that in mind, I'll start with my presentation. If I can have my slides, please. Fentanyl, I think you probably by now have heard it's a synthetic opioid, meaning it's made in the lab. But fentanyl is also natural. That has been used for a generation, over years and years, for pain. So and with the hospital, they do give that as a pain option. But nowadays, it's being produced in the lab for the purpose of selling drugs. So it's 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. So it's very powerful. One little small less than half a milligram or less could kill you. So it is very inexpensive to produce, and it's produced in many labs, and it seems that our district attorney's office is here today. They will go more on where they are coming from, but we're definitely getting produced in different labs and coming from overseas and getting distributed here. Fentanyl is mixed with other drugs, as you just heard from Mr. Mullen and the videos. Now fentanyl is laced with heroin, cocaine, SSC, meth, and more importantly with other pills, as you just heard. Kids thinking they're taking Xanax or Percocet, but it's mixed with fentanyl if you're getting it from outside resources, not a pharmacy. As I just said, it could be sold as part of the powder or as a pill, and the pills looks like real prescription, so you would not know it's fake. But it's if you're buying it off the street, it's definitely fake. Next, please. These are some how these pills look like. So you can see the blue pen, which is oxycodone, sold on the street. You can see the orange one, which is the Adderall. You can see that. The green one is Xanax. Those are some of the examples of how these Fentanyl pills looks like. It looks like very real, so you would not know it's mixed, but it is. Unfortunately, a lot of our teens who are getting these drugs, they don't know that it's mixed. Next, please. And our DEA have sent warnings that one small and one pill could kill you, if and especially you buy it not from the streets. If it doesn't come from pharmacy, it will be most likely laced with fentanyl. Next. So where are they coming and how these drug dealings are happening? A lot of them are through social media. Snapchat, for example, is one big source of it. That's how one of these things are happening. And I'm going to pass this on more about our district attorney's office that they will talk more about because where this is coming from and how the social media affects this. But just to know, the kids are getting mainly their sources through social media. Next. So in Santa Clara County, every year this fentanyl have been going up and up for the last, since 2015 really has picked up. And last year we lost 135 fentanyl related casualties alone. Next. And out of 35, and I have to make a correction now, my slide here is wrong, it's 42 out of 135 that got poisoned by fentanyl and under age of 29. So that's a big number, 42 is almost close to half of all the casualties we are having and fentanyl poisoning. So as you can see, in 2015, we had 9 overdoses related to fentanyl. 2017, 17 went to 16, and then 2019 to 20. 2021 to 90, and then 21, 135. So it's keep going up. Next. This is the chart to show you that how this is going up every year. As you're just seeing, it's skyrocketed from where we were in 2015 to this time now. Next. The Santa Clara County rate of fentanyl overdose, that's by age group, you can see primarily is on ages 15 to 19, then follows by 20 to 24, and then 25 to 29, and then all the way kind of going to 39 years of age. So it's really taking the bulk of the hit in our young adults and teenagers. Next. So what is county's response for overdoses? We have done a lot of outreach campaign media and doing a lot of community outreach by doing these kind of events, being in schools, working with the parent group. We're providing treatment options, providing Narcan to the community. And by the way, we do have Narcan here tonight, which we'll go over it in a little bit. Providing fentanyl strips. Anybody wants it in Santa Clara County, residents are welcome to receive both Narcan kits and fentanyl strips. Partnering with colleges, and we have parents groups such as Mom Alliance, and the launch of the Opiate Treatment Center. Next. So just again, this is what we're doing in schools. As we're doing more presentation like these, we're working with some of the schools that have nursing. We provide them with Narcan training. We're doing presentation when we're hoping to our schools adopt an opiate curriculum that talks about opiates and the dangers of that, and we're in the process of that. Next. So this is probably for some, if you have any kids that might be struggling with opiates, please reach out to us. We have developed the first Bay Area Opiate Treatment Center in Santa Clara County, and which is providing a comprehensive treatment to this age group, and our team is made up of adolescent psychiatry, addiction medicine specialist, peer support, and counseling team. Next. So if you do need the help, there's the parent support group, the Mom Alliance. We provide Narcan, as I said, is here. And consult with a clinician. You can call us, and we can provide you with a number or some clinician to talk to, a physician or a counselor. You can express to them, and they can tell you more about what resources and availabilities are for you. And then our treatment is available on the spot. So your teen could come any day to the emergency room, and it will be provided with treatment. Induction, and there's no appointment needed, but definitely there's appointments are available if you want to be seen as an outpatient. Next, Narcan. So that's the life-saving drug for opiate overdoses. So that will reverse the opiate overdose. And it's called naltrexone, but it's available in the form of nasal spray. It also, which we have here available in the back, you can go see our staff there. They can do the education for it and get a kit for you to take. Next. Okay, so I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Ali Al-Quraishi, who is our Chief of Substance Use. He's going to talk more about mental health issues. Thank you all.
Thank you, Supervisor Sanchez, for having us here. I'm trained as a psychiatrist, as a child adolescent psychiatrist. The patients that I see is an old term is dual diagnosis. Now we say co-occurring condition, meaning they have both mental health issues and substance use, including alcohol. So this is where I work for Santa Clara County. My presentation is not really be so much clinical, it's more practical tips. The first thing I would like to say, if you suspect your child may be using, they probably are. And please do not deny that that's a possibility, especially when two parents, they cannot decide whether the kid has an issue or not. Please get help. The most important, to me, change that you may see is a change in behavior. And it's very important to keep that in mind. If you think about them as being alone, isolated, depressed, and then there is a sudden change in behavior, that makes you really suspicious. On the other hand, if someone is very outgoing, very happy, they have friends, and then all of a sudden there is more anxiety and depression, sleep is very important. It's a sudden change in sleep. So I want you to focus on that, please. This is one of the things that you can do as a parent if you suspect that. Keep track of that. Teenagers in general do not reach to their parents to get help with these issues, unfortunately. But you as a parent, when you're observing, you need to talk to them and open this issue up. As a matter of fact, I have here on my list, I'm going to give you homework for today, is that I hope when you go home, the first thing you're going to do today is talk to your kid or kids and say you went to a presentation about fentanyl. And you could tell them this is a very deadly, serious drug that's being sold on the streets, and people don't know they're using it. It's really important to do that. I think we've said that. I'm repeating myself. I want to emphasize that. I want you to tell your kid that. I also want you to do one more thing. Alcohol and marijuana, although they're legal, and you probably have them in your home, please lock them up. Don't have your kids have access to them. A very simple reason. When a kid is using other substances, whether it is ecstasy or cocaine or methamphetamine, whatever it may be, a lot of times they use marijuana to help them, let's say with anxiety or sleep. Or if they get too hyper, too agitated, they may use alcohol. So what I'd like you to do is lock them up, because that's one thing you can do, that you are trying to help your kids so that they don't have access to these substances. What I'm going to talk about is a couple issues. COVID has been already mentioned. COVID has changed a lot of things for most of us. And the general population is going to suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. All of us are going to suffer from that to a varying degree. But unfortunately, the kids are probably going to suffer more than fair share of this COVID experience because how it's affected their school and their socialization. So keep that in mind. Many parents tell me that COVID had a major change and impact on their life. Then to start with, teenage years are difficult years. We all remember our years. And to start with, without COVID, without having all these issues we're dealing with, it is difficult because of hormonal changes, growth spurs, body image issues, especially girls seeing all these changes happening to their bodies. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure on them. And that adds more pressure. So when you think that your kid may be using a substance, it doesn't have to be fentanyl. This is really a general thing. So what do you watch for? Their mood changes. I would say the main thing that you would see and look for is a change in mood. They may become more irritable. Their sleep may make changes, which means they may stay out very late, they sleep in late, or they cannot sleep, or they may tell you, I want you to take me to the pharmacy to get some sleep aid. Please watch for that. Weight and eating habits, because these substances affects the brain. It affects the feeling of hunger, so do watch for weight changes. The general rule of thumb is that people will have pinpoint pupils if they're using opioids in general. But that's not always the case, because when the opiates, the effect goes away, the pupils get dilated. So just by looking at their pupils, you cannot really say they're not using. It's also related to COVID and to the teenage years. They may tell you that they feel bored or hopeless or helpless, but they cannot explain to you why. Keep that in mind, please. I know I have kids. As teenagers, it's hard to communicate with them. But try as much as you can open the door to allow for communication. Another aspect of all of this is arousal or hyperarousal state or hyperactivity. These drugs, in general again, but we're talking also about fentanyl specifically, there are a lot of change in the physical activity. So with that goes poor focus, poor concentration, and poor schoolwork. There's something I want to point out, since I'm a psychiatrist, is that people ask me what's the difference between a psychotropic medication and substance use that people buy on the street. Most people use substances to get an immediate result, whether it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana. Anytime a person uses substances, they want to get what we call immediate gratification, meaning the immediate feeling good. Psychotropic medication or psychiatric medication work for the long run. You don't really feel much effects when you take them, and you don't feel effects when they wear off. And most of them are used once a day. Also keep that in mind. I think I'm gonna leave it at that, but I will be available if someone has questions.
I'm going to invite up DA Rose and to make some comments just about kind of what we're doing on the legal side of this, and then Dr. Sussman.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. I'm Jeff Rosen. I'm the district attorney, and I brought with me tonight Ed Liang, who supervises our major case and drug trafficking unit, because as Brennan mentioned and others have mentioned, there's a supply side and a demand side, and we want to address both of those, meaning we want to educate young people to discourage young people using either intentionally or unintentionally fentanyl, and we also want to make it very difficult for fentanyl to be distributed in our community. So Ed, would you talk a little bit about some of the supply side efforts we're making?
Thank you, District Attorney Rosen, for the introduction. Again, my name is Ed Liang, and I am the supervisor of the Major Crime and Drug Trafficking team at the District Attorney's Office. Next slide, please. So before I get started, I kind of want to talk about more about the data, sort of why we're here, and really a point that Brennan had brought up, which is ultimately that fentanyl is an equal opportunity killer. And it doesn't care who you are or where you're from, whether it's in this county, this state, or in this country, it will kill anyone and everyone. And as we're looking here at the breakdown by race, for example, here, while it does show that there are two groups that are hit the most, every group is ultimately affected by this. Next slide. Even by age group, we care quite a bit about the young people in our lives and making sure that they're not going to be affected by this, given all the stories that we've heard here today. Our office had a contest recently. It's a contest for high school students, and every year there's a different topic. And this year's topic was, what is the face of fentanyl? And with the entries that we received, what we learned and what, unfortunately a lot of students are aware of is that the face of fentanyl is your parents, your brothers and sisters, your friends. And what we can see here, the people that are being affected the most are the young people in our community. Next slide. Here shows deaths by incident locations. So we can see here, obviously San Jose is affected the most. But the real takeaway here is that nearly every municipality in our county, nearly every city and town has had at least one death just last year. So nobody can escape what is going on. And that's why what we're talking about here is so important. Next slide. So how is our office addressing this? One thing is the creation of the team that I ultimately supervise. Next. Thank you. So this is sort of an evolution from our prior narcotics unit, and one of the main focuses of this unit ultimately is on fentanyl cases because we understand about how dangerous that ultimately is. One thing that we are hoping to establish with the support from the Board of Supervisors, from supervisors like Supervisor Chavez, is augmenting and giving more resources to our specialized enforcement team that our county has. And one thing that they would do is respond and investigate fentanyl poisoning deaths in this county. Next slide. This slide shows the number of prosecutions that we've had in our county for anything related to fentanyl. And as you can see, there's been a dramatic increase with respect to the prosecutions in our county. It's 123 last year, 72 of which were felonies. And the most common charge for that would be possession for sales of fentanyl. And the biggest seizure actually happened most recently. Next slide. Earlier this year, we seized approximately 11,000 fentanyl pills, which is by far the largest seizure in our county. And if we consider each one a potentially fatal dose, that's potentially saving, approximately 11,000 lives. Drugs that will no longer be on the street. Next slide. Another potential avenue that we're looking at are called fentanyl advisements. This is actually warnings provided to drug dealers to let them know how dangerous fentanyl is and to let them know that they could be potentially prosecuted for homicides or murder if they provide fentanyl to somebody knowing that it's dangerous and that person dies. While that is a tool that could be used in future prosecutions, really what that is ultimately is an educational tool. It's a very direct warning to people who sell fentanyl to let them know how dangerous it is and to make sure that they understand that there will in fact be consequences if they do kill anybody. Next slide. We do have homicide prosecutions in our county. We've charged 2 people so far with murder for providing fentanyl, knowing that it's fentanyl, knowing how dangerous it is, and somebody dies. And what I can ultimately tell you is that we understand the gravity of a decision like this. This is not something that we ultimately do lightly because of all that a murder charge and a conviction ultimately entails. But we ultimately do this because we understand how serious the situation is. And when a situation as serious as fentanyl exists in our community, we have to make sure that we react in the same way to understanding how deadly it can be and the consequences for that. And sometimes that ultimately means that we have to prosecute somebody for murder. And that's the thing too, the people who die from fentanyl, they aren't addicts as we traditionally know them. Really, they're victims. Most times, as was mentioned before, these are people who are unknowingly taking these drugs. Next slide. So here's some more additional resources that would be helpful for all of you to learn more about fentanyl and how you can all speak to your sons and daughters, your brothers and sisters, your friends about this, and some of it's already been mentioned before. I'd like to end with this ultimately. I'd rather not be here. I'd rather not have met Brennan. I'd rather not be here talking about all the people that have unfortunately died from fentanyl poisonings in our county. But we are here, and we understand what is happening, and we are doing what it takes in order to prevent more deaths happening in this county. Thank you.
And I want to make sure we have time for questions, so if folks do have questions, start to think about them. Rachel's going to be our last presenter. Thank you. Or Dr. Sussman, I'm sorry.
No problem. So I'm a family medicine and addiction medicine physician. I'd like to focus on some practical tips. I'm going to skip ahead a few slides, so go next, next, next. Okay, so I want to talk about from a parent's perspective, and then also perhaps from a young person's perspective who might be using drugs, what are some ways that you can recognize that trouble is happening, and how can you treat an overdose, unfortunately, if that were to occur? So from a parent's perspective, and this was already mentioned by Dr. Ali, please make sure that in your home you don't have regular access to opioids. So if you ever were given opioids after a small medical procedure and those are in your medical cabinet, please dispose of them safely. If someone in your home is taking opioids or any other controlled prescription like benzodiazepines, for example, please make sure those are under lock and key. I agree with having other substances carefully controlled in your home as well. Make sure you talk about fentanyl-laced pills with your kid, and we talked about that. If you're worried, please make sure that you let your child's pediatrician or family doctor know that you are worried about your child. Express those concerns. You can always ask to talk to them when your child is not in the room. And then please don't be alarmed when your child's doctor asks you to leave the room so that they can talk to your child on their own. That may lead to some greater confidence sharing, and hopefully your child's doctor can kind of make some progress in helping them. If you think your child is at risk, so for example, you know they've used pills in the past, or perhaps you know they have friends who have used pills in the past, I highly encourage you to go ahead and have naloxone at home available to you in case of an overdose. And you can talk about this with your child as well, and you can phrase it as, hey, you know, this may be for you, I hope not, but definitely, you know, I've heard that your friends have occasionally used pills, and I want you to know where this is. I want to know where this is. We should have this at home in case something happens, and we should all know how to use it, okay? Finally, if you do think your child has developed an addiction, so we've talked about how many times fentanyl poisoning is just that, it's poisoning. Someone thinks they're taking Xanax, they think they're using cocaine, and in fact, that substance is laced with fentanyl. And so they overdose accidentally, it's really a poisoning. Other times, if people are exposed to fentanyl accidentally enough, they may actually become addicted. They may develop an addiction. And I want you to know that treatment is available for that, and it doesn't end with overdose treatment. So if someone overdoses and we bring them back, treatment starts after that. And there are a number of treatment options. Okay, next. From the perspective of a young person who might choose to use substances, I want to talk a little bit about what they can do to make themselves less likely to die. So, of course, we would prefer that people not use pills that may well be tainted with fentanyl, that may be quite dangerous. But if they do choose to use pills, there are things they can do to make themselves a little safer. A little bit. One thing is to use fentanyl test strips. So these can be obtained from the county. They're not perfect, though. You need to make a solution, dip the test strip in it, and fentanyl, unfortunately, isn't evenly distributed through a lot of these pills. So there might be like a chunk of fentanyl in one part of the pill and none in the other, and unless you test every part of the pill, which you can't really do, you don't really know for sure that there's no fentanyl in it. If you do take street pills, we tell people to make sure you have someone else with you. Take turns with the other person using the substance so you can keep an eye on each other and know if someone stops responding, stops breathing. Have naloxone available. Finally, if you don't want to use with someone else, you can even call. There's a service called Never Use Alone. It's a stigma-free operator who will answer the phone. They'll remain on the line with you, make sure you're responding, and if at any point you lose consciousness and you don't respond, they'll access emergency services on your behalf. Next. How do you know if someone has overdosed? If you find your child, your friend, how do you know if an overdose has occurred? Someone will look very pale. They may be breathing very slowly. They may have stopped breathing. They may be making kind of funny gurgly sounds. The first sign that we talked about of intoxication with opioids that Dr. Ali talked about is pinpoint pupils. So if the eyes are open, if the eyelids are open, and pinpoint pupils are present, really small black parts of the eye, that's one sign. Next. And what do you do about an overdose? You use naloxone. The brand name is Narcan. And I think maybe we'll talk about this a little more later, but here's some information about it. Next. So if someone overdoses and you found them, one thing to know is that giving naloxone, if you're wrong and they didn't overdose and there's something else wrong, giving naloxone will not hurt them. So there's no downside to giving naloxone. If there's any even question in your mind that this could possibly be an overdose, you should proceed to give naloxone, and you should not worry that you're going to hurt that person by doing that. The first step is to try to wake the person up, shout their name. You can rub on the center of their chest if they're not responding. If they're not responding and you think they've overdosed, go ahead and call 911 first, because sometimes one dose of naloxone is not enough to save someone. So you want an ambulance to be on its way, and then, next, go ahead and administer naloxone. It comes in a little nasal spray. You're going to spray it into one nostril. You wait a few minutes. If the person wakes up, great. You wait for the ambulance to arrive. If they don't wake up, you can repeat the dose in the other nostril. If the person does not start breathing, you can give rescue breaths. If you know CPR, you can administer CPR while you're waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Next. After an overdose, hopefully someone goes to the emergency room, assuming that an ambulance has been called. Be aware again that that's when treatment starts. So naloxone has saved them in that moment, but if they have an addiction, if they've developed an addiction by repeated use of fentanyl or other opioids, they may need further treatment in order to prevent them from using opioids again. Next. So the best treatment is really always going to include a medication for opioid addiction, and usually will also include some type of psychosocial support, so counseling, group work, that type of thing. There are 3 FDA-approved medications for opioid addiction, so just to mention them briefly, there's methadone, which is given in a methadone clinic. There's buprenorphine, which is given by a specially licensed physician in any clinic. And there's Vivitrol, which is not an opioid, it's actually an opioid blocker, and it's administered in a once-a-month injection in any doctor's office. So those are our 3 options for treating addiction, again, if that is present after an overdose has occurred. And that's all I wanted to say. I think we should go ahead and move on to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. So, Beth, you have a microphone? If anybody has a question.
Hi, I'm Dan Schrader. I'm the father of a boy, Saul Schrader, who died last November from fentanyl and other medications. And thank you for doing this, and I know how incredibly hard it is to stand up and talk about this. There's one aspect that wasn't discussed that I just wanted to bring up as well. That is, once you know your son or child or daughter has a problem, and you've gone through detox maybe you've gone through rehab, they're not out of the woods yet. Okay, those drugs can still hold their mind, and they will hide and they will lie to you, and you need to be so on top of things. And honestly, that's where I failed. So I just thought I'd say that it's not enough just to send them to detox, to send them to rehab. There's a lot. That's just the beginning of the journey, because these things it grabs their mind, and they can be so persuasive, telling you that they're clean when they're not.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry, very sorry for your loss, and appreciate you sharing that. Any other comments or questions in the room?
We have some on Zoom.
Great, thank you. Oh, we'll go to Zoom and then we'll come back to you, okay?
Okay. All right, this is an anonymous attendant. Did you find high school or college-age kids having worse time with drugs, fentanyl? My senior graduates next week and goes off to college. She may be naive. She's never heard of any drugs around school. Does not know where you would get it, but I'm concerned for any accidental, unknowing pills being slipped to her, etc.
I don't know if Rachel, if you want to respond to that. Maybe use this one.
So it's pretty unusual for someone to be given fentanyl without them being aware that they're taking anything. So, and I think there have been some kind of fear-mongering stories about touching fentanyl and having poisoning occur that way. There's maybe a little bit of controversy in the medical literature about that, but for the most part, I think that is not something that I have seen clinically, that someone is poisoned by fentanyl by accidental touching. You really need to ingest it, and in my experience, most people know they're ingesting some type of drug, even if they are not aware of what drug they are. So someone who's really never used street drugs or used drugs off of a friend before is not going to encounter this as a major problem.
Where can parents go to get their child help with their fentanyl addiction?
All right, which doctor? Or what, Myra or Dr. Ali? Do you want to respond? You want to come up here? Yeah.
Well, the best treatment for fentanyl treatment is, or in opioid addiction is the medications that are available right now. Hear me? Of approved that are available for treatment of opioids, and fentanyl is staff, addiction medicine specialists, counselors, and so again, in Santa Clara County, if anybody has struggling, go to our emergency room or our inpatient pediatric unit. You get treated, or call our outpatient clinic, which is by calling our gateway number. You can get into our outpatient treatment centers, and you can start with treatment. The gateway number. We can put it up in a second, the number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but yes, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? How doctors want to say?
Sure, I would just add, whoops, sorry. I would just add that increasingly pediatricians and family doctors, oh good, the gateway number is 1-800-488-9919. Oh, I'm so sorry. Give this back to you. 9919. Great. So I just wanted to add that a growing number of family doctors and pediatricians and internal medicine doctors do have training and licensing to prescribe buprenorphine from their clinics, and sometimes that's a better option for certain families, depending if you have a doctor that knows your family well, maybe your child feels more comfortable going to a doctor they've been seeing for a while. So it's worth asking at least your pediatrician or family doctor if they're able to provide treatment in addition to the wonderful resources that the county has.
I just want to, do I need to get here? Yeah, this is Dr. Alquaci again. Santa Clara County provides multi-level of services. As mentioned earlier, there is inpatient service, but we also have multiple residential programs, and the county offers like 30-day program, residential. So that's another alternative, plus the outpatient services. So once you get into the system through Gateway, depending on the severity and the drug being used, there are multiple services available. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Beth.
I was just wondering about the opioid blocker. How does it work? Like, what's the science behind that?
So, I'm not used to this. I'm going to try this. Okay. So naltrexone is the name of the opioid blocker that it comes in two forms. It's a pill form called naltrexone or an injectable called Vivitrol. It binds to the opioid receptor in the brain and doesn't stimulate it. So unlike buprenorphine and methadone, which bind to the opioid receptor in the brain and stimulate that receptor to some degree, Naltrexone binds to the opioid receptor and just sits there, and nothing else can reach the opioid receptor. So if someone is taking naltrexone or taking the injectable Vivitrol form of naltrexone, and then they use fentanyl or heroin or OxyContin, they've wasted their money. The drug will not be able to reach the opioid receptor in the brain, and so they won't feel any effect of taking that drug. In addition, that medication can help decrease their cravings, and that effect increases over time, decrease their cravings for opioids. Is this a follow-up question?
So if you take the medication and you're not getting the cravings, is it still lethal? Like, could you still die if you take enough fentanyl, or would it just cancel it out?
That's a great question. So we do think that being an active treatment with naltrexone and Vivitrol saves lives for two reasons. One reason is that you are far, 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 far less likely to actually use an opioid. Secondly, if you do use that opioid, it does somewhat decrease your risk of your breathing being suppressed by the opioid. Not completely, because the blockage is not necessarily completely 100%. But we do think that it reduces your risk of dying if you were to take a lethal dose. It kind of changes the threshold for what a deadly dose of fentanyl would be. It's a great question. It's prevention mostly through decreasing how likely someone is to take the drug, but it also is probably going to prevent as frequent of an overdose, yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to learn a lot. I'm a health teacher at Saratoga High School, and I have several students over there in the audience, so we appreciate this time. I have a couple questions. One, the new opioid treatment center, is that in Santa Clara County? Is that specifically for teens, and is that an outpatient program?
It's in Santa Clara County, and it's we have designated space that only sees opioid any teens up to the age of 21 who are struggling with opiate addiction, and it's located kind of by a regional hospital on the east side of San Jose. That's where it is, but as I said, it's staffed by we have a team approach. So, and also we have access to what Dr. Ali spoke earlier about residential. If somebody needs to go to residential treatment, it needs to go to detox, we have that. Or continue with outpatient. So we have multi-level services. And the other thing, the good thing about this specific program that we put together, while as Dr. Sussman mentioned that you can get the treatment probably just for buprenorphine or Suboxone and maybe naltrexone as well in the outpatient setting. Some of the pediatricians or family doctors offering it, but not a whole lot of them, but there are some. Is that they also get the social other support with it and within our treatment center, because we have a peer mentor, we have a child adolescent psychiatrist. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ali Al-Krashi is our specialist in that team, and our addiction medicine board-certified physicians who are working on this treatment program along with a counseling team. So, and pediatricians. So we're treating that one person from different angles and trying to provide them with all kinds of support.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And then I have a two-part question. One, are these free of charge to the people that come to those programs, or is it based on insurance coverage? And has insurance coverage increased due to the increased drug overdoses we've seen in Santa Clara County? So do insurance companies tend to approve all these programs, or are they free of charge in the county?
Well, as you know, the county is pretty much offering services to Medi-Cal population, but we do take some insurances. However, the level of care may differ because some insurances don't accept, for example, residential care or detox. So we have to navigate that with insurance companies.
Any other questions in the room? I know we're getting on our time.
Okay.
Yes.
There's one last one
Okay,
here.
we'll take this last question.
Will we receive a copy of this presentation or access to the recording? And the answer to that is yes. The school district's going to send it out to all of the parents who received the initial email at all the high schools within the Fremont Union High School District, and we'll be posting it on social media under Supervisor Chavez.
Great. I want to say thank you to everyone who came and spoke tonight. And this is a labor of love, I think, for all of them. So thank you for your. I also wanted to just thank our sign language interpreter. This was a lot of people to interpret for, and I normally talk very fast. I'm trying to talk very slow. Thank you. And also to our team from the county who connected us up. Thank you, Zach and team. You guys did a great job. And again, I want to thank the Lynbrook High School family and principal who let us join you today and for making today so easy to do. I want to really ask one last time if you can use the QR code that's on that poster on the way out, and for those of you who are online, just to give us feedback about, did you learn something? Was this helpful? What other feedback would you like to give us? I want to say to the young people here, you, and I'm so excited that your teacher brought you. Thank you for doing that. One of the most important things that we could learn is from them. What is compelling? What do we need to do to communicate more effectively with them? So if you could let us maybe talk to them and give us feedback, I'd love to get your card, and we'll make sure we talk to your students a little bit more. Thank you all very much, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to learn. We're going to go out to the schools in the fall with something that's a little more developed, but we wanted to get your feedback before we did that, and really, really grateful to all of you. I think working together, we want to bring those numbers way, way down, and we're going to do that together. So thank you all very much, and thanks to the DA in particular.